Hey guys, we're here tonight tiering every single ghost type Pokemon. So if you guys want to see more, of course, leave a like. It is the easiest and most effective way to support the channel. And comment down below what types you want to see next, or just in general what you think of the tier list. I would love to hear that down below. Now with that said, we're going to be tiering every single ghost type Pokemon that is either fully evolved, was meant to be fully evolved, so this includes Pokemon like Mischievous, or Pokemon that are just really good NFE Pokemon, like for example Dusclops. Now Ghost is a pretty slim list. I think we have a total of 51 Pokemon. So I don't know if we're going to need to open up the F tier necessarily, but we're definitely going to open back up the S plus at the very least, because I already know what Pokemon, there's already a few Pokemon that I think are going to go in S plus, and I'll get into that. So with that said, let's just go in order like last time. I think it's the easiest way to do this, and that means that we're starting off with Alolan Marowak. So Alolan Marowak is actually a pretty good Pokemon. I think this is personally an okay Pokemon in doubles. Albeit, it's not as good this generation, but it was pretty decent in Gen 7 at the very least in the non-Ubers formats as a sort of an okay Pokemon. It's also an okay ladder Pokemon, usually on Trick Room teams, and in Draft, it's got a cool typing. So with that said, I think that Marowak probably lands itself in the C tier. It's definitely not a D tier Pokemon, but to be fair, Ghost actually has a lot of competition, so you'll notice that as the list goes on. Barring the D tier Pokemon that absolutely suck, I think most of C through S are actually usable Pokemon. Mischievous, I will say, Mischievous actually has made me realize that we do need an F tier, in fact. And it's not for Mischievous, actually. It's because I think Mischievous is definitely better than a good amount of Pokemon that I would otherwise be putting in the D tier. I'm going to put Mischievous in the D tier, though. I think it's actually a pretty cool NFE ghost type. With the Violet, this is actually a pretty tanky Pokemon. It has some cool utility like Pain Split and Will-O-Wisp, for example. And in general, it's one of the Pokemon that definitely really benefits from getting an added evolution because of the existence of Violet. So Mischievous gets an easy D tier in my opinion. I think it's definitely on par with Mismagius, so I'm actually going to put it there. They just do different things. I think Mismagius is more of a, if you want a cleaner type Pokemon. And definitely in something like a BDSP metagame where a Violet doesn't exist, Mischievous is the clear better candidate. I would probably put this in C for Mischievous, Mismagius in C, and then Mischievous in F if it was just BDSP only. However, because this is a general metagame tier list, or just a general competitive tier list for any sort of situation, they're both going to get D tier. They're both pretty equal. They're really only viable in singles as well. They're neither are good in doubles. So Mischievous, with that in mind, because not just BDSP singles, it can't really get into C tier in my opinion, because it's really only viable in one metagame, and it's not that good in it. It's like very low tier in it anyway. Galarian Corsola. Galarian Corsola gets a C tier. I think this is, again, one of those okay Pokemon in just sort of every facet. It's not going to stand out really in any way, shape, or form, but it's a really good Pokemon, at least as a niche wall in OU. With the Violet, it's just a better version of Mischievous, which I think, while, as I said, I didn't want to put the other two up higher or lower because of the fact that they were decent enough in their own one respective metagames. I feel like at the very least with Corsola, there is a decent gap between Corsola and Mischievous, so I'm actually going to quickly already overturn my decision and put Corsola up here, despite only really being viable in singles. But it is pretty good in that regard. Shedinja, I'm putting Shedinja in D tier, not because I think it's really a great Pokemon, but because I think it's one of those, it's really, I think the fact that it can't be beaten unless you have a super effective type or hazards, I think that outright gives it at least above an F tier, because there are certain situations where Shedinja could actually just win a game. And also, I will say, I'm partially basing this off of the recent Wonder Good game from Road to Ranked. I didn't realize that Shedinja had any even meme use in VGC, but apparently it does. Obviously, again, that's a very niche situation, but between that and also singles, I think it at least has enough usage. Even if anything goes to a certain degree, this is occasionally used in the metagame. Albeit, again, nothing insane, but it's one of those very few niche Pokemon that's garbage normally, but can actually just ransack teams. So I can't put it in F in good conscience. Mega Sableye gets an easy A tier, and I'm going to put regular Sableye in the B tier. Regular Sableye is a pretty not bad Pokemon in VGC, though to be fair, this is probably the worst generation we've had for it, but obviously in past generations, you know, stuff like Quash is very good with Prankster. But I will say as well that VGC definitely, with Sableye specifically, it's taken a good hit, especially with things such as, for example, the Prankster nerf that means that it can no longer hit dark types. And one of the most common Pokemon in the entire metagame being Incineroar definitely is a good hit on Sableye, to say the least. Also, just in general, not exactly the best Pokemon to be using in the current metagame just because of how offensively oriented it is, and most Pokemon being able to outright Oko Sableye. But Quash still definitely has enough niche, and this still is an okay Pokemon in singles too, to be fair. Mega Sableye gets the A tier mostly just because of the fact that Mega Sableye, as a defensive Pokemon, is actually a pretty good behemoth. The typing is really good, only having one weakness in Safari, with several immunities to stuff like fighting and normal, and that also just in general helps it a lot. The Ghost Dark typing as well means that it's going to not be weak to Ghost anymore, which it normally would have been as a Ghost type. So yeah, I gotta give Mega Sableye an A tier, I think, in my opinion. And then regular Sableye, while it's not nearly as good in singles, I think in singles I'd probably put it as C tier. But because of the fact that this is including doubles, I think doubles brings it up enough of a usage to at least put it in a low B tier. Though I might drop this to C depending on how good B gets. Next up, Mega Banette. Mega Banette and regular Banette both get F tier, to be completely honest. They're both pretty dog shit Pokemon. There's not really a use to use this Pokemon unless you're going for, with Mega Banette, Prankster Debon, and with regular Banette, just throwing fodder on your team to let die. That's pretty much it. Dusclops gets an easy B tier. This was a VGC tier list exclusively, so we get an easy S tier. And if it was exclusively singles, it would get a D tier. So we're averaging out to B. This is a phenomenal doubles Pokemon. Honestly, it's really innovative doubles at this point. If I'm actually comparing, I'm gonna put Sableye in C. I cannot, in good conscience, put it in B tier with Dusclops. While it's not as bad as Dusclops is in singles, it's nowhere near the peak it is in doubles, because Dusclops is like a truly a meta Pokemon in doubles. It's one of the best trick room setters you can really get. On top of it as well, the Ghost typing is just so amazing, and especially with stuff like Frisk, you know, you can scout opponents' items. This truly is like a monster in doubles, in my opinion. So next up, we're gonna go with Drifloon. Drifloon gets a D tier. Truthfully, it's only because of the fact that it has a lot of good utility for VGC, but it's still kind of a meh Pokemon at best in VGC. Even with stuff like Tailwind, Destiny Bond, Strength Tap, etc., it's really not that good in my opinion. I can't really imagine a world where you'd use it, but I guess maybe there's some situations. To be fair, obviously Tailwind is a good enough move as it is in doubles with speed control. Also, Max Airstream is pretty cool if you want to max this Pokemon, and especially with something like an Unburden with a barrier weakness policy, you could maybe cheese some steps with it, but that's the only reason it's not getting an F tier, to be completely honest. Spiritomb, it's another D tier Pokemon. In my opinion, there's no reason in low tiers to use Spiritomb unless you really need the bulk specifically from the special defense side over, let's say, Sableye, which has Prankster utility, which is really good for it, as well as reliable recovery, or Mega Sableye, which just is a really good Pokemon. So I'm going to put Spiritomb in D tier. It's definitely lost a lot of traction over the years, though to be fair, I will say, is if Sableye, if Spiritomb had no weaknesses, I think I would probably put this at least in C tier, and then keep it with Sableye, because Sableye doesn't really benefit a ton from that, just because it's low bulk in general anyway, but just mostly Prankster that keeps it alive. I think that with Spiritomb it would make a bit of a difference, because it would make the no reliable recovery thing a little bit less bad, considering you could always just go for Pain Split or Rest at that point, and then just wall a lot of things. But I think the fact that there is a super effective typing for it now definitely hurts a lot more not having that reliable recovery to at least help you take a single hit against fairies. Albeit, not that you're taking a ton of them, but at the very least, maybe getting a Last Ditch Effort, Taunt, or maybe a Destiny Bond off against them. In general as well, it just makes its niche of being a no weakness Pokemon a bit less valuable, because it now has weaknesses. So, Spiritomb definitely gets a D tier with that in mind. Dusknoir gets a D tier as well. A lot of these Pokemon, we're hitting, I know I said a lot of the Ghost types are really good, but we're hitting a lot of the really shit ones early. Most of the Ghost types later on in the list are pretty good. Dusknoir, though, truthfully just has no use to use it in doubles over Dusclops. In singles, they're both about as good, but for very, very polarizing reasons, with Dusclops being purely a defensive tank and Dusknoir being more so an offensive bat Pokemon. But in VGC, there's no real reason to use this ever over Dusclops, because Dusclops is a Violate with the general bulk it has. It's just so good to enable other Pokemon, and also just so pitifully slow in Trick Room. So you can get a lot of things off, like for example, a really quick haze under Trick Room to stop other Pokemon that might be boosting from Dynamax. So I think there's really no reason to use Dusknoir ever over Dusclops in doubles, and they're both about as good in singles. Frostlass definitely gets a C tier. Really good Ghost type. The speed is amazing on this Pokemon as well, and especially with stuff like Triple Axle, now you have really good physical options as well as Poltergeist too. Physical and Special both have really good utility here. Physical probably actually became better in my opinion, because despite the fact that you have two moves that are gonna miss, they're both a lot higher base power, and on top of that as well, you still get priority in this variant, which you don't actually get on Special. So I think that Frostlass actually with physical ends up putting itself in C tier in my opinion. It's also got some really good utility with stuff like Taunt, Debon, Spikes, so this Pokemon definitely has more than just the offensive usage in my opinion. Rotom definitely also gets a C tier. Rotom is definitely a pretty good Pokemon, though to be fair, I think that every other Rotom form is now officially better than Rotom regular. Even the Fan and Frost, which were normally typically laughed at for being just really shit Rotom forms, especially Fan with Levitate ability. However, I think with Boots, these Rotom forms honestly just became slightly better defensive units, if nothing else. Whereas regular Rotom really only benefits from choice sets like Scarf or Specs. Sometimes Nasty Plot, to be fair, it's definitely not bad to go with Nasty Plot Hex with a Boots, but in general, I definitely think this has a lot of competition in comparison to the other forms, albeit it's at worst on par with Fan and on par with Frost. But I think it's something like a counter team format. This is probably the worst Rotom, if not Fan. And then in just general VGC, it's not really that good. Though to be fair, a lot of Rotom forms aren't that good. It's really just like Heat, I think, is the only one that I see with the occasional wash. But yeah, in singles, I definitely would never be using Rotom regular over one of the other forms unless it was in like a really low tier. With Giratina, I'm putting both these Giratina forms in the S tier, but I'm going to put in from S and above, I'm going to order them because I think that's where it starts to matter. So regular Giratina definitely gets above Origin because of the fact that honestly regular Giratina, if it's going to go for bulk, it may as well just go for the really extreme bulk and then go for just trying to tank hits as well as possible. Giratina isn't exactly the most offensive Pokemon, and even with Origin's slightly better offensive stats, you do lack the item choice on it, which I think definitely hurts it a lot in my opinion. Regular Giratina, I think is a definitive S. I think at Origin, you could make a case for A, but I think it really just depends on, like, as of right now, I think you can make a case for A. But to be fair, I think that with, when A and S fill out a little bit later, you'll see why we have it in S. I think it's just a case of Giratina being probably the worst S plus for Origin form that we're going to get. It's definitely the worst S Pokemon. And then alternate form, I think, is going to be the best S that we're going to have in here. So with that in mind, they're just kind of both different Pokemon in my opinion, but they both deserve the S ranking just because the fact they can do each other's jobs. To be fair, like Giratina Origin could be a defensive Pokemon and Giratina regular could be an offensive Pokemon. Just that really it's a matter of picking which one you'd prefer to use, because otherwise you're just using it inoptimally in my opinion. Next up though, we have Arceus Ghost. At least I think this is Arceus Ghost, if not a Ground form. Easy S+. Arceus Ghost is one of the better Arceus types you can use. Ghost in general is a really hard type to switch it on, and especially the fact that you are an Arceus, you would definitely tailor your set to try and take on stuff like Dark types, or at least just go for E-Speed on them. Because with E-Speed plus Phantom Force, you're able to honestly hit a lot of Pokemon pretty well. Barring actually I can't even really think of many examples that are commonly run. It would really just be like a T-Tar or something, which you could still run Earthquake for. Like an SD3 attack set is still pretty phenomenal. And especially because of the fact that Arceus can use Z Crystals in a National Dex metagame instead of the plates, you can always get a Max Phantasm or a Z Ghost. I think it's a Never Ending. No, that's a Mimikyu. I can't even remember the Z move for Ghost. Well, no, I think it is Never Ending Nightmare. Point is, it can use Ghost TMZ, and the +2 Phantom Force is now a one-hit move instead of 2 turns, which makes a world of difference when you're trying to attack with Ghost because it's probably the best physical option you get. Calm Mind's still okay on this, but I think that physical is just so good with SD because it's a really quick setup option, and you still get priority with that. With that said, though, Arceus is definitely probably the worst S+ we're actually going to put in here, but it is still definitively an S+ by a good amount. Configurious is definitely another B tier Ghost. I think it's better than all of these. The only one you could maybe make a case for is a little Marowak, but I think as a general blanket versus just in singles, I think Coffin is a little bit better. Not only that, I think the fact that it's just a really good Trick Room setter, it's basically just Dusclops if you want to run an item that's not a Violate. So for VGC, I think it has enough bulk to really pull that off on like a Dusk Noir, let's say. Especially in the not restricted formats, this is typically a Pokemon that you can at least find some competition for as a Trick Room setter. Typically, though, teams went with Dusclops, but I remember Coffin being a little bit used depending on the team. Not only that, but Mummy is a pretty good ability, so you have the option to take away people's abilities with that, which is really cool. It's basically like, you know, spreading a virus. You can just easily touch someone, and then bam, they lose their ability, which is pretty useful depending on the team you're playing. So with that said, I think a Coffin is easy B tier. It's definitely worse than Dusclops, I think, just because of how good Dusclops is in doubles, but it's only because of averages. In singles, this is miles better. Jellicent is another Pokemon that I think is honestly going to get in the C tier, but I think that Jellicent is definitely one of the better C tiers. Jellicent's typing and the fact that it has a couple immunities thanks to Water Absorb is really useful. It's a cool Trick Room water type, and not only that, but it has options to take advantage of at least maxing. I remember in there was a Charizard team with Gmax Charizard that ran Jellicent on it, that Aaron Trailer, I believe, competed with in one of the earlier VGC series, and it was such a cool Pokemon. I honestly fell in love with using it in doubles after that. And it's a cool Pokemon to use in singles in the lower tiers, or even just in a counter team setting. So I think that Jellicent at least gets a C tier for that. It's a really good bulky water, has some nice utility, especially with Strength Sap now. So I think it'd be kind of weird to not put it there. Next up we have Chandelure. Chandelure is another Pokemon I think is in C tier. It's pretty much on par with the Marowak. I just think it has the edge in singles, whereas it's a little bit worse in doubles. Though I will say, I know that at the very least in not Ubers formats, I've seen a few teams that run Chandelure in doubles, mostly because of stuff like Heat Wave and the fact that it can run Trick Room. To be fair, I think it was more of a niche thing, but I know there's a couple teams that I used that I was past that did really well, that had Chandelure on them. So I don't know how good it was. I didn't actively play a ton of VGC at that point. It was more so dabbling. So couldn't really speak on it at that point, but Chandelier, at the very least, I know has a good use in sickles. The typing is incredible, and its speed is a lot better than all Marowak's, so it's really good in like the RU sort of tier, for example, especially as a Boots Pokemon or a Scarf or a Specs user. So yeah, Chandelier is definitely in the C tier in my opinion. It's one of the better options, but not the best. We have Golurk up next. Golurk is the definitive best C tier, D tier Pokemon. I don't think that anything is going to end up being better than that personally, but yeah, Golurk is a really good typing with Ghost Ground, and the fact that it has a really good Phys stat for the ground typing is really incredible because it's just in general really good at taking hits from stuff like opposing ground types, maybe going for an Ice Punch or a Poltergeist on them. Same as stuff like flying types, for example, which you can do the same for. Or just in general, a lot of the physical types, you could typically take the hits from really well and then revenge them off because you have a really good attack stat, and it's also a really good rocker too. Has a few good abilities such as No Guard and Iron Fist, so you know, you're really chilling with Golurk. It just, no recovery on a ground type kind of sucks. Especially when there's an option like Palisade, for example, that definitely gives it a good run for its money on the special end. Both are pretty equal. In fact, I'm actually going to put Palisade in there now. I think these are quite literally two sides of the same coin. Palisade is the Spadef walling and recovery, and it's also a special attacker, whereas Golurk is the real physical tank, both offensively and defensively. So they're pretty much two sides of the same coin. While Golurk, I think, is a little bit more of a brute force Pokemon than Palisade is, at the same time, Palisade has stuff like Water Compaction to boost special attack, on top of also actual recovery. So it really just depends on your personal taste there. They're both very, very good D tier Pokemon. Next up, we have Doublade. Doublade, I think, it definitely gets a C tier. Violet in this Pokemon is honestly really filthy. It's just a matter of the fact that Doublade is infinitely inferior to its evolution being Aegislash, which Aegislash definitely gets an A tier. I think Aegislash is definitely better than Mega Sableye at the very least, but I think that where Aegislash holds itself back is honestly just due to power creep. I think that a lot of Pokemon finally caught up to Aegislash as of Gen 8. In Gen 7, I think it would have still been one of the better A tiers, but I think it's still just barely been an A tier. Gen 6, I think it definitely would have been an S tier, though. I think the power creep just was, like, not the degree of how good Pokemon were in Gen 7 and Gen 6 is truly night and day, in my opinion. And Zemus especially, while Aegislash can definitely take advantage of them, it's definitely not going to take advantage of them as well as stuff like, for example, Gengar or, like, Marshadow or Lunala would for those higher tier ghosts. And in terms of the lower tier ghosts, in terms of the defensive ghosts, there are better ghosts, like, for example, the Giratina forms at taking hits defensively. But Aegislash definitely has some nice use. For example, it's a really good Xerneas check, which is amazing for the Ubers format, whereas the Giratinas lose pretty badly to it because they're Dragon types as well. So it has some use in Ubers over these two Pokemon for sure, despite them being some really good defensive Titans in Ubers. But ultimately, I still definitely think that this is just a whole different degree of a blanket Pokemon, despite, I think, it competing better in certain metagames. Because obviously, if you're just taking the upfront playing against an Aegislash versus playing against a Giratina, the Giratina is inherently scarier without getting into specifics like, you know, do you have, let's say, a Xerneas as the opponent for these? Because obviously, in that case, Aegislash would be a scarier option versus Giratina, which would lose quicker. So I think besides taking in specific matchup things, if you're just talking about specific which Pokemon is inherently scarier, I think it is still Giratina, which is why I'm putting Aegislash in A tier despite it competing better in certain metagames. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, feel free to have your disagreements in the comments. I would love to hear them. Trevenant's up next. Trevenant is definitely a D tier Pokemon. It's just inferior to our next Pokemon being Gourgeist. Both are defensive and somewhat to an extent offensive grass ghost types. I think that Trevenant definitely has some good use with stuff like Harvest, for example. It's pretty good in that regard, but I think that Frisk ultimately is the more useful ability, especially with Gourgeist having multiple sizes. It has a bit more fluidity to its sets, and unlike a Pokemon such as Silvally, which only has one type that's a ghost type, well, one form that's ghost type, all of Gourgeist's forms are grass ghosts, so they all actually do add to its versatility here, which is a really good use it actually has in terms of a tier list like this, where all the other Pokemon that have different form changes, besides like a Giratina, or I guess the Megas versus regular forms, they're all not the same typing. None of them are also ghost types. So I think with that in mind, there's definitely a really good case for Gourgeist just in the fluidity of its stats alone. So I think I definitely got to give it at least C tier over the other Pokemon, despite neither Grass Ghost really being anything insane anymore. Next up we have Hoopa though. Hoopa I think I'm definitely going to give another C tier. Though I will say this definitely got a lot better without stuff like Pursuit in the metagame. Hoopa still, in the end, is just kind of a lackluster Pokemon. Base 70 speed really isn't that great. It's kind of forced to run a Scarf, or you're forced to run Webs with it. It's a little bit faster Trick Room too, which is typically, you know, 60 or slower in my opinion, is a good Trick Room speed. Hoopa, unless you're really playing in like a counter team format where you know it's going to be running Trick Room, or where you know what your opponent's speed tiers are going to be to run Trick Room, it's a little bit hard to pull off base 70 Trick Room in my opinion, especially as a breaker, and the fact that it's not really a reliable setter either. it's still a really good typing. Ghost Psychic is amazing besides the fact that Dark type exists and opposing Ghost types. But obviously opposing Ghost types have to worry about your Ghost typing, and for Dark types, this gets Focus Blast, so it has coverage. I just think it's really kind of lackluster because of that speed. If this was like a base 90 Pokemon, I would easily put it in A tier in my opinion. But because of that, I think I'm going to put it in C. Decidueye's up next. This is definitely the best Grass Ghost. I'm going to put it in B tier. It's a niche Pokemon in doubles, and I use that very loosely. I know that in, like, for example, Gen 7, this was a very niche doubles Pokemon. It's more so up here, less so for the doubles rating. It's just more so it can do stuff more than at least Gourgeist and Trevenant. It's definitely a pretty good Pokemon in singles, though, at the very least. This is typically an NU Behemoth, if not an RU niche Pokemon in the past couple generations. And especially in Gen 7, this is a really good Z user, but this gen, it still has some stuff like good defensive utility with, let's say, Roost and Defog, and it's a good pivot, which Gourgeist and Trevenant both lack the potential to do. Doubles, if you were to run it, it has Tailwind, which is an edge over the other two Pokemon. Though, to be fair, if I remember correctly, they both have Trick Room, so I guess it's kind of equaled out. But Decidueye also has some good options for coverage. It's a lot better coverage than, at the very least, Gourgeist. Trevenant, you make a case for, but Trevenant's also just a lot more passive. Well, it's a lot slower, I should say, but it's also really awkward speed tier. Decidueye has some really good setup for it, too, so I think I definitely got to give Decidueye the B tier. Oricorio, I'm going to give Oricorio the D tier. Albeit, this is, again, one of the better D tiers for sure. Dancer's a really cool ability on it for doubles, but at the same time, though, it still just has such terrible stats that you can't really ever pull it off unless you're really trying to go for a specific counter. Like you need to be playing against very specific teams for Dancer to really pop, in my opinion. And on top of that as well, the typing, while it's not terrible, is also just, it doesn't really have the best stats to really take advantage of it, because it is still Oricorio. It doesn't really have a stat over 100, if I remember correctly. And if it does, it's not really anything that's massively impacting. Like, I think maybe at most has like a special attack that's like right around 100. But point being, though, is that it just doesn't really do enough. Yeah, none of its stats actually hit 100. Its highest is 98 special attack, and then 93 speed, and the rest are 70s. So definitely a D tier Pokemon, but its typing mostly carries it. We have Silvally Ghost next. As I said, if this was Silvally in general, it would be a C or B tier. The fact that it's just a single typing, though, most will land in F, but I think this one actually gets a D tier, just because Ghost is such a good typing, and the coverage, it still definitely has some okay coverage. But by no means is this a good Pokemon. It's probably one of the worst D tiers we're going to have. I just think the Bandits are so much worse. Mimikyu's up next. Mimikyu honestly also gets an A tier. This is the next A tier to go, and it's mostly because of its double utility. This is another really good Trick Room setter, and it has some good utility, but it's also a Pokemon that, unlike Dusclops, is not hard set to have in your run Trick Room. This is a Pokemon that, while you're typically going to run Trick Room on it, you could potentially at least use it in games where maybe Trick Room doesn't pop, because it still has some good stuff like Willis, for example, which Dusclops can get too, to be fair, but Mimikyu also can afford stuff like reusable items, like a Mental Herb, which avoids taunt matchups. It has stuff like Shadow Sneak for priority, which it can pull off a lot better. I believe Dusclops gets it too, but at the very least, it's a lot less passive than Dusclops is. So it's a lot less passive version of Dusclops in VGC. And on top of that as well, it's just a lot better singles use, albeit it's no behemoth in singles by any sense, but it definitely still has a lot going for it just with that typing alone, and the fact that it can get a swords and stuff for free with Disguise. To be fair, with Disguise and Nerf, the fact that you're no longer able to run a Sash set with it, that definitely hurts it a lot, because otherwise you basically had 2 free Focus Sashes if Hazards weren't up, which is honestly really amazing. But because of that, I think I gotta give it an A tier. It's still low A. I think it could have been a mid to high A if this was Gen 7, but I think with that in mind, it's definitely a low A. I still think it is better, though, than everything we have in B right now. Dhelmise, I think Dhelmise, I'm going to give another C tier to. This is pretty on par with Gourgeist, but I think this is one leans a bit more into the FizzDef end. Whereas Gourgeist, on the other hand, definitely had, I think Dhelmise ends up being more of a tank and also a removal option. Whereas Gourgeist definitely has mostly, it's a hard lock for defensive or like maybe a trick set. But Dhelmise's removal, I think, definitely puts it at least above Gourgeist. I just wouldn't put it a tier above, because it still is kind of a hard Pokemon to pull off, in my opinion. Actually, no, I take that back. I'm going to put it with Decidueye. I think that it's mostly just tank versus cleaner is really the best case for this. And I definitely think it is definitely above Gourgeist, at least. Lunala is an easy S+. I'm putting this above the Arceus. And while you might ask yourself, why is Lunala S+ when there's an infinitely better Calyrex Shadow Rider? I think the fact that you have to ask yourself that question, the fact that you have to compare it specifically to Shadow Rider, which is a monster in its own right, I think speaks for itself. I think Lunala, if Shadow Rider did not exist, would be an easy top of the metagame Pokemon in Ubers. It would be a top of the metagame Pokemon in VGC. Albeit not to the same extent that it would be in Ubers, because Veltal is such a menace in VGC, and even still stuff like Kyogre and Zacian would easily outclass. but it would still be one of the better, like a really good Pokemon in VGC. I wouldn't say one of the better, but it would probably be like a high B, if not low A tier. In terms of singles, at the very least, it would easily be like an A+ tier Pokemon. But I think it's the fact that it can still survive to a certain degree in a metagame where Shadow Rider Calyrex exists as a general competitor with so much faster of a speed and just a much better breaker. I think speaks volumes of how good Lunala would have to be. And it also, unlike Shadow Rider Calyrex, this is really good defensive utility. So I think it's an easy S+ in my opinion. Throw Boots on this and it's honestly insane. We have Dawnwings up next, which I'm going to put below regular Giratina and above Origin. This is a case of, again, similar to Aegislash, where I think that while Giratina is definitely a better metagame Pokemon, Dawnwings inherently just is a better Pokemon in its own right. Especially if you were to play this in, let's say, like a draft setting, this is easily going to put in a lot more work than, let's say, a Giratina Origin. And Giratina Origin isn't a ton better in Ubers to where I think it's justifiable ahead of Dawnwings. It's a little bit better, and same goes for singles. It's purely because same goes for doubles purely because of the fact that it has Tailwind, which I think is something. But Dawnwings I think is just kind of shit in doubles. I don't think that the gaps that Giratina has over Dawnwings are too massive, but I think the one area that Dawnwings has the gap over being draft is such a big volume that I have to put it above, especially in a draft setting where item lock really hurts Giratina. It's a big reason why. Marshallow's up next. Marshadow is definitely so far the best S+ we have. The fact that its stabs are so obnoxious switching on, and the fact that it has good coverage for some of the few Pokemon that really can. Things like a Veltal, for example, take 2 KO guaranteed even if Max is death from banded Marshadow CC is incredible, because that's typically one of the Pokemon you would use to check Marshadow. Easy S+ in my opinion. I don't even think that anyone's really going to bother competing with that, because it's such an undeniable point for it. Blacephalon. I'm putting Blacephalon right behind Aegislash and A tier. It's a really good Pokemon. Fire Ghost is really good typing, and with Boots, especially the fact that it's no longer taking Hazard Chip, helps it a ton. It's a really good special cleaner, especially with Beast Boost. This is an easy A tier in my opinion. Poltergeist is an easy C tier. Smash is really okay on this Pokemon. It's the only reason it's not an F tier Pokemon in my opinion. It's just kind of shit bulk, really not good coverage at all. Really not that good of a Pokemon. Next up, we have Cursula. Cursula I'm putting right next to G Corsola. It's not that great of a Pokemon in my opinion. The fact that I think that they both kind of compete similarly with each other in my opinion is just in general speaks of how bad G Corsola and Cursula really are, but I do think they're definitively better than everything in D tier so far. I think that as well, the one area that I'll give Cursula over Corsola, and it's by a very slim margin, is doubles, and it's just because it's a Trick Room setter that can also really well break, which is definitely something over Dusclops because it's still really slow. It's just the Dusclops is so much more passive, so I don't think it's anything good, but it's at least better than Corsola in doubles, and Corsola's just slightly better in singles. Neither are anything stand out though. Rune I'm going to give in the B tier as well. I think that while in singles it's inherently worse than Coffin, I think that it has a case in stuff like counter 2 formats or by a slim margin, or also in doubles by some margin, just because of the fact that you do have the Wandering Spirit and the ability to trade abilities that way. It's a little bit of a more so just depending on how you want to play it sort of thing. Also, the fact that it has Stab Earthquake is really incredible, and the fact it's physical attacker, so it can more easily trade the ability and force the ability to trade, is definitely a thing in its favor. I think that Coffin is definitely the better one of the two, but I think that this is still at least something to mention in B tier, in my opinion. I think it's in that sort of playing field. I think with this in mind, though, seeing how the tier is folded out, I'm going to move Marowak up to B, and I'm also going to move up Chandelure. I think in hindsight, these are two definitely better than everything we have in C tier by a good margin so far. Chandelure easily is just a much better breaker than most of C tier, and on top of it as well, it has a decent-ish speed for singles as a Scarfer, and Marowak is a really good trigger breaker, and it's far better of a breaker than everything in C tier so far, barring maybe Hoopa in terms of trigger, but Hoopa's speed is so much worse for it. Next up we have Dragapult. I'm giving Dragapult an S tier, and it's mostly because of its draft format presence, as well as the fact that it's still a phenomenal Pokemon in both VGC and in OU. It's got banned in national decks, it's a really top tier Pokemon in Sword and Shield decks, it's a really good Pokemon in VGC, and it's a borderline banned Pokemon in Draft League. So I think this is an easy S tier. I would personally actually, and this might be a hot take, I would personally put this slightly over Giratina Origin, just because of how good this is. And truthfully, I think this mostly comes with the fact that Dragapult doesn't have to worry about the competing for the restricted slot in VGC. I think these Pokemon, as blanket Pokemon, are pretty equal, with Giratina having much natural bulk. Its bulk is insanely better, it's undeniable, but Dragapult at the very least has the item potential there. However, I think that in VGC, the one reason that I'm putting this above is because in VGC, this does not have to compete with a restricted slot, which is a huge benefit Dragapult has. Because you throw Dragapult on with 2 actual restricted Pokemon, this is still a good behemoth, albeit it's not the same top 5 Pokemon that this is in like a singles format, especially in a draft setting or in a Sword and Shield metagame setting. but it's still a really good Pokemon to have with the typing and the fast speed. It's also a really good max Pokemon with weakness policy. So I definitely gotta give Dragapult an S tier very, very easily. Next up, we're gonna give Spectrier. I'm giving Spectrier an A tier. And this, truthfully, as good as it is in singles, and this is a phenomenal Pokemon in standard ladder game metagames, but I think that while it is the best Pokemon in A tier, definitively, I think that its usage in VGC is definitely competing with stuff like, for example, Calyrex Shadow Rider, which is inherently just a better Pokemon to use. Not only that, but it's even in the non-restricted formats, it's just the worst horse in comparison to Calyrex, not Calyrex, to Glastrier, because Trick Room was just a better playstyle at the time for that sort of format. Now you can make a case for Tailwind because Torn Ogre is just such a good core, but in the non-restricted formats, it's definitely Glastrier in my opinion. Not only that, but as well in a counter team setting, the fact this doesn't have that good coverage is a bit obnoxious to use this Pokemon, because you can play around it fairly easily knowing that it's mostly a ghost type Pokemon. So I definitely gotta give it a really high A tier, but I think that just because of its general underperformance in everything that's not a Smogon metagame, it's definitely just a really high A and not a borderline S. Next up, Calyrex Shadow. This is a definitive best. If you really didn't think this was going in top 1, I question the legitimacy of your tier list, in my opinion. Yeah, this is a very clear top 1. Next up, Gigantamax Gengar. Gigantamax Gengar gets, honestly, I'm putting Gigantamax Gengar in A. I'm putting it below Aegislash. While Gigantamax is inherently broken, it's an insane mechanic. As a Gigantamax, it's actually a pretty lackluster option. And I would truthfully rather go for Max, like a normal Max Gengar, just for the stuff like Max Sludge. And I don't think a Max Terror is that good when you have an inherently better trapping option through Mega Gengar, which I gotta put below Marshadow. The only reason that I'm putting this above Lunala, and I know that a lot of draft people are gonna really hate that I even I'm putting us here, because in draft, especially for like the BBL format, I think it's bad. For a non-restricted Uber draft though, where you're just drafting Ubers as you like, or there's no just one Uber cap, I think that Mega Gengar is a really good option. It's inherently a million times better when you pair it with another Uber. And obviously Doubles is a phenomenal Pokemon. We've seen it time and time again through the Gen 7 and 6 formats. This was a really good option. Not only that, but in standard Smogon metagames, this is a monster. The fact that it could trap Pokemon, and you could specifically tailor what you want it to trap, and a lot of standard teams are really weak to this. Having Plot is also really good for this because you run Mono Ghost typically and beat a lot of common Pokemon. So yeah, Mega Gengar is an easy S tier, S plus tier, definitively. Haunter is going to be a D tier Ghost. It's a really good one, but it's pretty on par with Mischievous. I think that what I will say is I think the fact that this is one of those Pokemon, one of the few Pokemon that was not meant to be a final stage for a Ghost, but ends up still being a really good NFE that's viable. I think is incredible for it. The only one on this list that is besides Haunter would be G Corso, and that's just because of G Corso having such good bulk. And to be fair, you can make a case that because it was meant to parallel regular Corsola, that is considered one anyway. But for the sake of this, the evolution line was created with another evolution stage to it, and this is not off of regular Corsola, it's off of Galarian Corsola. So technically, I will give that to Haunter. That's the small piece of comments. That was the small thing in Haunter's favor I would give it. Next up, we have Gengar. Gengar is an easy A tier. I'm gonna put it right above Aegislash, just because right now Gengar is a pretty good Pokemon and stuff. Like, for example, it's a nightmare and borderline bad in BSP, though I think the same is worse, like a worse to play against. That's a whole other discussion though. In singles, it's still a really good option for like an OU tier, albeit it's not the same monster that it is in BDSP. It's still really good in Sword and Shield. It's an amazing Z user in that it's an incredible, well, it's an okay Pokemon in doubles. It's an incredible Pokemon to draft though, especially in draft formats for national decks. It's a really good offensive Ghost. But in Sword and Shield, it's really good too, obviously. The typing's really good. I think that Gengar and Aegislash are pretty on par. I think it's spec mostly against the edge, truthfully, because of Smogon performance, and that's really it. Next up, though, we have the Legends of Arceus Pokemon. Hisuian Typhlosion, definitely a D tier Ghost, and I think it's one of the worst ones, personally, that we're going to go over today. Hisuian Typhlosion is honestly really horseshit. Unless they give it some good coverage, this is a terrible Pokemon. And while you might say to yourself, you know, it's kind of unfair to use Legends Arceus movesets against each other, against the Pokemon, because they're normally pretty limited, there are some really good options on here, actually, for Legends Arceus Pokemon that are inherently better, such as Basculete Legion. Now, the male one I'm going to put in D tier, but I think that the female one is inherently better with C, just because the fact that it doesn't have a good physical Ghost move. Now, if male was, or even just Basculete in general was to get Poltergeist, I think male could actually be a B tier Ghost, and female would still say C tier. C tier, though, is really good because it has stuff like Hex, for example, to take advantage of, as well as just, obviously, Scald, so it has some good coverage on special end, and female has a slightly better special attack stat. Finally, though, we have the final Pokemon today, Hisuian Zoroark. Now, where am I putting Hisuian Zoroark, you might ask? I'm putting this above Gigantamax Gengar, below it. Actually, I'm putting it above Aegislash and even Gengar. The fact that Speed dies Gengar, but also has a couple immunities to stuff like Fighting and Normal. I think not only that, but the fact that it also has a Ghost immunity. It's actually 3. I forgot about the fact that Normal is immune to Ghost. But it's 3 immunities, which helps a lot because it takes away Normal's only weakness and it takes away one of Ghost's 2 weakness. This is only weak to Dark types. Not only that, but the typing and speed is incredible offensively. This already has some pretty good coverage with stuff like Sludge Wave, or Sludge Bomb, I think it is, with Flamethrower, Shadow Ball, etc. So this has some good options. The fact that it has Nasty Plot too, it's a really good Nasty Plot user. The speed here is 5 base power higher than, 5 base speed higher than Zoroark's normally, which honestly is such a good edge for this Pokemon because of the fact that having the base 110 speed times stuff like Gengar, Lotties, etc. So I think I definitely got to give this thing an easy A tier. I think this will be a monster when it gets introduced. And that's even just off the coverage as alone, let alone if it gets expanded upon come whenever it's added to a national deck setting. But with that said, that is our tier list. Let me know what you guys think below and what you guys would rate normally as the best ghost types in the format, or what the worst ones were, or just what you want to see next. If you guys enjoyed this, leave a like below and subscribe for more content like this. Leaving a like is obviously the easiest way to support the channel, and subscribing is the best way to stay notified when videos happen, especially if you hit the bell icon. Now, with that said, channel members that I would like to shout out, of course, thank you guys for your support a lot. This goes out to Zeke Zero, Josh K Ultra Player, Randy Chapa, Mia, Rika Hoshizora, and Pokemon fan Kazernius. Your support is greatly appreciated. And with that said, I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Until then, peace out, guys.